Australian Aviation Podcast, the official podcast of Australian aviation, unpacking the latest insights, developments and issues impacting Australia's aviation sector.
Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. Now, as many long-term viewers, listeners, I don't know what the word is, long-standing, long-suffering viewers and listeners will know, this show really has just turned into being total nonsense. But when we started doing this podcast, the brief we got was market intelligence. The idea was that you would find out the news and you would find out the insights before anyone else. For the past 6 months or so, my colleague, who I'll introduce in a second, has been telling you the news 6 months before it happened. He has been saying over and over and over again that Rex is going to get nationalised. Everybody laughed at him. It transpired this week. He is correct. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but for now, I will introduce Mr. Market Intelligence, Jake Nelson. Jake, how are you?
I'm the Cassandra of aviation, Adam.
Cassandra to who? To Rodney? That will only a few people.
No, Cassandra to the King of Troy,
right.
Who was cursed by the god Apollo with prophecy,
Right.
but also that no one would ever believe her predictions.
Oh, I see. Oh, it actually
Yes.
makes sense. Yeah. I thought you were talking about Rodney Trotter.
I don't know who Rodney Trotter is.
Well, you're meant to be into comedy, so you should know that. And we got any before we steam into the news and I blow smoke up your backside? Have we got any shout outs? Any messages from our adoring fans?
We had a comment from at James Sterling 3792 on our video last week. Probably staying on the topic and less waffling of. I'm not going to repeat what has been written because this is a family podcast.
Yes.
But less waffling of nonsense would be in order.
And that was just it, was it?
That's it.
And
That's
what
the
was
comment.
that person's name? What was it?
That was at James Sterling 3792 commenting on YouTube.
We don't want that feedback. Keep it to yourself. If you've got nothing nice to say nothing at all. That's my response to that. I don't
Well,
want to
now
hear it.
we have thanked James for the constructive feedback.
Did
And
we?
Yeah,
Who sanctioned that? I didn't.
It was none other than Jordan the Great.
Oh
Adam.
God. Oh, I thought he was actually pointing at me to pause the recording, but it transpired he did. So he gave you the go-ahead to say something nice back?
I believe he said it himself, Adam.
I don't. Did he? No, well, I don't. That's not on behalf of me. At James, whatever you're called, 7825, go away. Yeah, I would say another word, but this is a family show, as Jake said.
Australian Aviation, driving our audience away one listener at a time.
Any other shout-outs, messages? Thank you.
We've also had from an anonymous person who says that they love the podcast.
Fantastic.
And they have shared some gossip with us, which we're not going to disclose because we are a professional outfit.
Right.
But suffice it to say that this person is unhappy with their current circumstances.
Right.
But they do love the show. So,
that's the main thing.
Yeah, but they do love the show, and we are glad to have received feedback that we are a light, a shining beacon in what is undoubtedly dark times. I don't know if I'd go that far.
No, we got any other shout-outs, so we're going to... That's it, is it?
That's about it.
That's about it. Right, we'll start with the business of blowing smoke up Jake's backside. So to give you... Well, no, you start... Give us some background on where we are with Rex before we talk about how great you are.
Yes. So Rex, as we are all no doubt aware, has been in voluntary administration since last July. There have been, rumours and speculation, but so far no buyer has come forward who would, take the whole thing, or no buyer has purchased Rex. The people have been the administrators, EY Australia, have sold off bits and pieces. They've sold off Pellair, the aeromedical wing, to Toll Aviation. I believe it was reported last year, there were rumours that they were looking to sell off the flight school in Wagga Wagga. But so far there has been no buyer for Rex, which has been in sort of a holding pattern. Part of the difficulty in selling Rex is its aging fleet, which is something like 59 or 58 Saabs, Saab 340s that are, almost as old as we are, that have, I think, more than half of which, Adam, are parked in storage.
Yeah, that's true. We saw that on planespotters.net, excellent website.
Yeah, so it's something like 29 are in storage and 28 are in service out of a fleet of 57 or something like that, which is
So the issue they've got is that they're trying to sell this airline, but at the moment, effectively only half the aircraft are operational, or at least from what we know. And of those that are operational, they have an average age of like 30 plus, which in airliner terms is basically ancient.
in dog years.
In dog years, yeah, it's ancient. So the issue the administrators got is that they have the air operator certificate, which is effectively like the driver's license or the piece of paper that says you can do this. They have the routes that they're operating. They obviously have the staff and a customer base, but they don't really have it. Well, they have aircraft, but they're going to need to be renewed. That is going to cost an awful lot of money. The other issue Rex have had, that all small airlines have, is for a lot of pilots in particular, working at Rex is a stepping stone to a larger airline. So they are finding a situation where the old management would say that their best people are being poached.
I believe that they were complaining about this like last year or the year before, saying that Qantas and particularly Qantas, because Rex has a long-standing blood feud with Qantas, but particularly Qantas has been stealing their pilots, and other regional carriers have come along and said, "Mate, come on,
that's just how it works.
That's how it works. We're regional carriers. So that's left as well other regional airlines in something of a holding pattern, because they're not sure whether to try to move now on Rex's routes, or they've been carriers such as Hinterland and Skytrans. They've basically been saying, we're ready. We can step in and fly these routes that if Rex goes under. But Rex so far has just been kind of puttering along in administration. So they haven't been able to plan properly.
The problem is that I'm not saying they're lying. Of course, I do think they have genuine attempts to go into these routes. But the question would be, how long would it take them to actually move into those routes? So they might say it straight away. But even if these routes were to be not serviced for a few months, that's a disaster for a lot of these regional towns. And secondly, you would imagine that those rival airlines will go into the most lucrative routes, not necessarily the least lucrative ones. So the government has this kind of stick or twist.
Now, a lot of these routes are subsidised.
Yeah. So the federal government, which is kind of now effectively in charge, having bought out the bulk of the debt, so it kind of now can dictate terms, is if they do let this thing go under, there is a chance that in the run-up to an election, or perhaps shortly after, a lot of regional towns are going to be cut off from big capital cities. So they don't really know what to do. They're kind of playing it safe, or they have been. We knew that there was obviously a first round of trying to find a buyer, which obviously wasn't successful. They hope to have a second round of potential, a second round where people can, come in and try and purchase the airline. You would have to say, though, and clearly the government's conclusion is that looks quite unrealistic, because if they were going to come in before, they would have done so. Why would you buy an airline where half the aircraft are out of action, maybe even long-term, and all the aircraft are aging? You have said for many months, the only real alternative, or the best alternative, is for the government to effectively renationalise Rex. For months now, people have been saying you are crazy. That mad guy on your podcast, he's talking rubbish. Get him off. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Yet again, Australian aviation printing lies. That is the kind of abuse that I and we as a team have had for months and months and months. They have said, you are crazy.
Melded into the background with all the other abuse that we receive.
Yeah, we get a lot of abuse. They have said you were crazy. And then last week, it transpires they're not laughing anymore, Jake Tusselaus.
Yeah, so I have been saying, as Adam says, that these moves by the government has repeatedly said, we don't want Rex to fail. We want Rex to keep flying. These are essential services. These towns need these Rex flights. And they have been moving. They have, granted Rex an $80 million line of credit. They have, bought out this $50 million of debt from PAG Capital, which essentially makes them the largest holder of Rex's debt and gives the government final say over what happens if Rex is at the end of Rex's administration. They have been moving to shore up Rex's position as much as possible. And I have been saying, and I wrote an op-ed to this effect a few issues back in Australian Aviation magazine, that maybe the government is preparing, or maybe a solution would be for the government to purchase and run Rex itself. The government has deep pockets. It can buy new aircraft, or at least, mid-life aircraft that are not as old and clapped out as these Rex Saabs, which you can't really get parts for anymore. They can run Rex essentially like public transportation. The government runs trains, the government runs buses. If these are essential services, the argument goes, why not planes? And so the Transport Minister and the Prime Minister, Catherine King and Anthony Albanese, they came out last week, and the government has said in a statement that the government is going to support Rex and its administrators through this next round of the sales process. They want to find a commercial buyer. They say they want to find a solution that will allow Rex to keep flying in commercial hands. But if that fails, then the government is looking at the option to step in and buy and run Rex itself as what would be the first the government-run airline in Australia since the privatisation of Qantas in the 90s.
Now, the problem is that firstly, like politicians, as I'm sure everybody watching this will know, maybe if you're being unkind, you'll say they're quite slimy. If you're being kind, you'll say they're very careful with their words. They're very careful with the words. And they so far have avoided using that kind of language. They've said, our preferred option is to find a buyer. They've actually said a potential option now is to buy it. The issue is, now they've said that, who on earth would come in and buy it? Because effectively you've got two options. Either you come in and buy an airline that has, as you say, kind of clapped out aircraft, or you wait a few years for the government to go in there, sort out the fleet, put some money behind it, and then sell it at probably a reasonable price. Why would you do that?
Unless the government, of course, would not plan to sell it after a couple of years and would keep running the airline itself. It's kind of a rock and a hard place situation for the government here, because as we've been saying, it's either you let Rex die, you let it collapse, and all of these communities lose their air services right before an election. Now, these other airlines have said that they can step in and potentially run these routes themselves. But as you said, we don't know how long it would take them. We don't know how many of the routes would be covered. So it's either let Rex die and annoy or anger a bunch of people in these regional seats shortly before an election, especially with the collapse of Bonza last year as well, or buy the airline yourself and, run the airline yourself to keep these essential services going, but, annoy people who say, oh, you're wasting taxpayers' money, and annoy these other airlines who go, oh, well, we could have done this.
But the issue is that, like you said there, the government's in between a rock and a hard place. What are they meant to do? They will get criticised by the regional rivals that will say it's not fair, that we're up against the government, this goes against free market economics, this is terribly wrong. But at the same time, they don't know for sure whether those rivals actually will move into those routes. These are essential services. They have an election coming up. I know it has to be held by early May. The talk now is it's going to happen in April. The last thing they want to do, at least now there is some certainty that these routes, whatever happen, are going to continue for the long term. So they kind of had no real choice. I would think the most likely outcome now is that they would have, I say like almost a sham, but they will have a sham call out for investors, which is going to yield nothing. Probably now it looks like the most likely option is that the government would come in and buy it out in the middle of the year. Obviously, to throw into the mix as well, we've got the issue that we do have this federal election coming up. We don't necessarily know what a coalition coming in would want to do. And it looks like we could have a hung parliament. I think there was talk at the weekend you could have a coalition in a coalition or being propped up in supply and demand by independents, by Greens. Whether that would ever happen, I don't know.
The Greens would not prop up a coalition government. They wouldn't.
They're more left-wing than you.
No. The Greens would not pour water on the coalition if they were on fire, I say, on this very family-oriented podcast.
But it's a very awkward situation, right?
Some of the more conservative independents might prop up a coalition government if the coalition won enough seats. It's sort of all really depends, because it would be unlikely that the coalition would win a majority in its own right.
And then you've got the issue here, without going too much into politics, that you have a coalition government, but they are deeply influenced by a handful of independents, say, that ultimately have the balance of power, and they will have a huge say. So those people as well will have a say. You would imagine they would be in favour of nationalising Rex, but again, that could be a decision for a coalition government. It could be a decision for the Labour government. So there's still kind of a lot of uncertainty here. I don't know what the answer is, but kudos to you, because you did say this months and months and months ago, and I think even you saw then there was no way out of this. There was almost like this was the inevitable end goal. If you knew a bit about aviation, you could look at their fleet and you could see the situation. That did seem like the only way through. Nonetheless, no one else was saying that. You spoke.
There were people advocating for it. You know, that the TWU was saying that.
But they would say that
the government. Well, the TWU was saying the government should take an equity stake in Rex, which you have agreed with, Adam.
Yeah,
you said that, you know, if the government's pumping all this money into Rex, it should get something out of it. You know, the Greens went further and said, you know, I think Adam Bant was tweeting, well, why doesn't the government just buy Rex and you know, shortcut the whole process?
Yeah.
So if the government, if this proceeds as we expect, and no buyers come forward, and the government does purchase Rex, it will be the government, you know, sort of taking on the risk and the expense of renewing Rex's fleet, because somebody has to.
Yeah.
And it will be the government that would be running these services. The government would, you know, essentially be subsidizing its own services, you know, running. I mean, it's already subsidizing these Rex routes. It would be presumably running these routes on the cheap, to keep prices low for regional areas, as it's kind of doing now with the subsidies. And it would also essentially, you know, as I said in my op-ed, you know, perhaps a publicly run Rex would avoid some of the foibles of the privately run Rex, or the publicly listed Rex.
Yeah.
You know, including like endless bickering in the boardroom, and you know, chaotic attempts to enter the you know, domestic jet space. Though maybe if the government decided it wanted to bring airfares down by hook or by crook, they might do that. Or, you know, picking fights with Whyalla Council or whoever every other week. So it could be a good thing for Rex, if the government steps in and nationalises. It could be a good thing for these communities. The other regional airlines probably would not be happy.
No, I don't want to blame any one individual at Rex's management, because there was a lot of politics behind the scenes, and there were a lot of forces at work that we don't know about yet. And we've had John Sharp on the show a couple of times. Love John Sharp. But again, he was effectively running that airline for 20 years. He wasn't the main owner. That was Lim Kim Hai. But again, there's also only limited money available. So I don't want to pin it on any one person, because it's easy to be a clever clogs right now. But you would say, for whatever reasons, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there was a kind of failure of management, or there was a failure of strategy here, that they got themselves into this situation where they have a fleet which is so old. No airline wants to spend big money on buying new aircraft, because obviously that comes out of your bottom line. But there comes a point where you have to do it. Now, we've had Qantas get quite a lot of stick in the last year or two for their supposedly aging fleet of 737s, but they're nowhere near.
Their first A321 XLR, by the way, I believe has left the paint shop. So
we'll come back to that later. But they've had stick for aircraft that are kind of up to about 20 years old, nowhere near the 30-year mark that Rex are at. But nonetheless, if you don't invest in new aircraft, this does come home to roost, because like you were saying there, it's, you know, the aircraft can technically last as long as you want, like with an old car, but the older they get, the harder it becomes to even get hold of the parts. And what they probably weren't to know was we've still got these post-COVID supply chain issues, talent crisis problems, which are all adding to that. So they're now in this very difficult position where, you know, it's just hard to get hold of parts. And in fact, it would be hard to get hold of new aircraft. If a government were to take over, do they buy shiny new aircraft? Could they even get hold of them? Do they look to go dip into a kind of second-hand market? How feasible is that going to be? How much of a premium are they going to pay? It is going to be a mess when they finally try and sort this out.
Yeah, for sure. And look, one can imagine a universe where instead of, leaping into the, trying to replace Virgin Australia during COVID, when planes were so cheap that you couldn't give them away, Rex, that's when Rex had the idea to try and essentially supplant Virgin by becoming the new second domestic carrier in Australia's skies, and bringing in all these 737s. One can imagine perhaps a universe where a more prudent Rex looked at the situation and thought, maybe nobody's buying too many turboprops either. We can pick up some turboprops on the cheap, some ATRs or some Dash 8s or something like that, and replace these Saabs that are getting a bit too long in the tooth.
True, I do see that point. But what I would say is it's PAG, who were the kind of Asian investment firm that came in. One of the reasons they did that was because it's kind of sexy and exciting to buy 737s and take on Qantas and take on Virgin, try to be a new dominant force in Australian aviation. It's not quite as sexy and as obviously exciting to say, I'm going to run these regional routes and I'm going to run them rail. So it would have been harder for them to get that investment just to renew their fleet than it would be to have this big exciting
And this
idea.
is a problem with venture capital firms, but that's a discussion for another time. But I will say, maybe a footnote, Adam, it would be highly ironic, I think, if the government stepped in to nationalise Rex, because Rex, if you remember, was born from Hazelton and Kendall Airlines, and Hazelton and Kendall were the regional arms of Ansett, and Ansett was the private airline in the in the airline duopoly, before its collapse before the privatization of Qantas, before it collapsed in like 0102, Ansett was the publicly listed company, and Qantas / TAA, Australian Airlines, whatever you want to call it, was the public one. So it would be ironic if the last remnant of Ansett became a publicly owned company.
And also, I wrote, I think it's a year or so back, a kind of a long obituary into Max Hazelton, the founder of Hazelton Airlines, and he was known as being this kind of rebel. He was kind of constantly challenging the government, defying laws. He was I think I called him like the last of the Mavericks. The idea...
You did call him that.
They did call him the last of the Mavericks. The idea that airline he created would ultimately end up being the only nationalised one. I don't know if he'd be turning in his grave or if there'd be a wry smile on his face.
Well, it's possible that they could harness the energy from him turning in his grave to make clean electric aviation.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Strap a generator to him, and harness if he's turning in his grave. Use it to power planes with.
What have God, what a huge! You was one of the legends of the business. We're not having that with the deepest respect to Max Hazelton.
Yes, deepest respect, of course, to
anyway,
Max Hazelton.
Right,
but if you're looking to learn more about Rex, by the way, and how it got here, we have a feature coming up in the next issue of the Australian
do the link.
Aviation.
You're doing a link to your own link to your own delivery. You can't do that. That's unprofessional. You can't be like,
well, you do it then, Adam.
Yeah, I will do. I was going to. Right. So basically, we're talking there about the trouble Rex got into. Someone in the office came up with a brilliant idea that what we should do for our magazine was to kind of delve into our archives and effectively run kind of edited versions of the news stories we've run on Rex for the last sort of 2-3 years, kind of showing the kind of fall and rise and fall again. And these features work quite well because you get to see the nonsense in real time, and almost you get to see the boasts and what have you. You spent a day, we were on deadline, something fell apart. You spent a day, absolutely not at the last minute.
A Rex Saab it was, I believe, that fell apart.
There you go. You spent a day going through it. Could you give us an almost like a concise, edited version of what happened, and also some of the things that stood up? Because you were like researching this in the office. You were quite shocked to read back some of the stuff they were coming out with.
Yeah, it was eye opening. You had at the very start, this idea of going into to the domestic jet market to compete with Qantas and Virgin, right through the securing the funding, the getting the planes up and running. We had, the plane that came to Rex from Virgin that had been repainted and did that fly past over Sydney Harbour. You had all the endless spats with Qantas,
which were exceptional value. We did great views on those.
They were really. They were really something, Rex and Qantas constantly sniping at each other. John Sharp says this and Alan Joyce says that. And, John Sharp says, oh, we have the tenacity to stick around. We'll be around for ages. And all of these boasts, there was stuff that we had to leave on the cutting room floor. Rex criticizing Bonza, for example. I don't believe that made it into the article, but it was very It was very
bullish.
cocky.
Yeah.
It was very cocky
Yeah.
from Rex, and from the people at Rex, particularly John Sharp.
Well, but I would say in John Sharp's offence, and I did an interview with John a year or two ago, and I kind of put these points to him, and he said, we've had tremendous fun doing it, but the reason we do this is because we are fighting to stay in the game. We are the underdog, and I would say in his defence here, he did it because it's free publicity, because they don't have a big marketing budget. So if you have a leader who has this kind of brilliant way with words, you might as well do that. Like, I would say that the management team and John Sharp at Rex has a very dry sense of humour. Don't take everything literally, otherwise you're walking into his trap. He's having a bit of fun. He's getting some publicity. All of these stunts raise the profile of Rex. And one of the issues with 737 flights failing, as you pointed out, they only really had a marketing campaign about a week or two before they went under.
Yeah.
They had no mass advertising. And while we would all be aware of it, and Rex loyal customers would be aware of it, the wider public, I would argue, had no real idea that Rex were in the game. That was part of the problem. So he would argue we had no choice but to swing a few punches, because otherwise we wouldn't have gone anywhere. So that's the kind of the other side of the story. Nonetheless, now it is an absolute mess.
It is an absolute mess. And by the way, the Transport Minister, there has been some criticism of the government for not criticism of the government and the minister for not meeting with airlines who are reportedly looking to come in and buy Rex. But she's basically said we're having to take a hands-off approach here, for reasons of probity. The government has to treat every bidder equally. The bidder need to go through the administration. She's been saying we can't meet with individual airlines who may be bidders. This is a process where the government will step in with some support. We will need to treat every bidder exactly the same. She said, we welcome that there are airlines wanting to do this.
Yeah, and again, it's like you say, they're in a rock and a hard place, and it's very easy to criticise, but ultimately, they do not want this airline to go under, or it's already gone under. They do not want this airline to be out of action in the run-up to an election, and shortly after. That would be a disaster for them. So there's only so much they can do. In their defence, it does feel that the nationalising Rex has been a last resort, and they've now got to the break glass in case of emergency point where they have to say something. As well, they had very little choice but to come out and say this now, because they have to give some reassurance to customers. Now, they have got this idea that if you book a flight with Rex, you will get your money back. They will guarantee those flights, but they won't necessarily guarantee the hotel you've booked or the meeting that you've scheduled in. There's an element that in order
or
for
the medical appointment or whatever.
Or the medical appointment, exactly, because these are essential flights. So by them saying this, at least now everyone has a certainty that probably for the next year or so, these flights will, God willing, happen. So it was a point of last resort. Anyway, we've probably spoken enough about Rex. We had another very big story that broke today about Virgin Australia and their deal. The deal for Qatar to buy Qatar, mate. Qatar to buy a quarter of Virgin.
Sounding like a strange bird at this point.
I am Qatar. Oh God. So anyway, they obviously Qatar want to buy 25% of Virgin, and as part of that deal, they will wet lease aircraft, or Virgin will wet lease aircraft from their partial buyer. In a wet lease basically means you take the crew and you take the aircraft. So as part of a deal, that has to happen. All of this, the deal, and I would imagine the flights, have to be cleared by the ACCC. The ACCC previously, a couple of months ago, gave a kind of preliminary approval. And what this meant was an initial green light that meant that Virgin could start to sell these flights. But they've now had the next step in the kind of authorization process, which is a good sign for Virgin. Jake, talk us through what's happened.
Yeah, this was a draft determination essentially from the ACCC, where the ACCC is proposing to approve these wet leased flights. They've said it's likely to result in public benefits, unlikely to result in any public detriment. Basically, Anna Breakey, ACCC Commissioner, says that the deal will increase competition. It's unlikely to have a negative effect on Australian jobs. So this includes, increased choice of international flights, additional connectivity, convenience, and loyalty program benefits. She's also noted there's been, concern that it could impact the workforce. She said that Virgin Australia is unlikely to commence operating long-haul international services between Australia and the Middle East on a standalone basis in the next 5 years. In those circumstances, we do not consider that there is likely to be a material detrimental impact on the Australian aviation workforce as a result of the conduct. Now, so this is only a draft determination. It's not like the final authorization, but it's basically, basically all but a formality at this point that the ACCC is going to greenlight this deal.
And it's also, this might seem like a weird analogy, but it kind of reminds me of what happened in COVID. The reason why countries went into lockdown is because all of their chief medical people and their chief scientists said, you've got to do this. And so what government would ever go against for scientists? In a sense now, the federal government are in a similar sort of position, because if they block these flights, then the biggest reason they would block them in a kind of a higher level is this would be bad for consumers. This would be bad for competition. This would be bad for the industry. When the ACCC, your official body, say that is not true, we think this is good for Australia, that now puts the government in a huge bind now, because it feels now that if they were to reject this, there would be outroar. So of all of the developments we've had...
Outroar and outrage.
Yeah, whatever. You know what I mean. Outrage. Uproar, whatever. Anyway, but
both of those were correct.
The point of them is, so they've had all of these incremental votes of support. Well, pretty much apart from Qantas, for obvious reasons, the industry has really got behind this. They've got the backing of a TWU, crucially. They've got the backing of a lot of the other kind of industry partners. To have the ACCC as the kind of final piece of the puzzle, you would now say that the federal government have very little choice but to allow this to go through. Obviously, the previous kind of history here is when the federal government stepped in and stopped Qatar directly launching more flights from Australia to Doha, and they did it on the basis that effectively they'd taken their allocation. Virgin have, I don't want to say a loophole, but they found...
Yeah, what the government said was that it was not in the national interest to allow these flights.
It was not in the national interest. The government now look very silly, because now Qatar, I say they basically have found a way around it via Virgin. And now the ACCC have basically said it is in the national interest. So if the government were to step in and block this now, it looks very petty. It looks like you're playing politics. It looks like you don't want to lose face. But it would be very hard. Like if you were the coalition, if you're Peter Dutton, and you're the coalition, transport spokesperson, who were very loud.
Bridget McKenzie, I believe.
Bridget McKenzie, who was very loud in saying that the Qatar should have been allowed these flights. And originally, there would be absolute uproar for them if the government tried to block it now. So assuming this does go through, this now makes the federal government look a little bit silly. I know it won't necessarily be the transport minister this time that will make the decision, but nonetheless, the signs of the stars are aligning now, and you would now say it's 95% likely this deal is going to go ahead.
Yeah, so it's still got to go through the Foreign Investment Review Board, because Qatar wants to buy 25% of Virgin, and that's Foreign Investment Review Board, which is Treasury. ACCC has to make the final determination. We also need to hear from the IASC, which is the International Air Services Commission, who would be allocating the capacity, which is currently unused, these 28 flights from Australia to Doha. So the IASC needs to make that decision. They have received advice from the Transport Department saying that this would be allowed under the agreements with Qatar, the country. So that's another good sign. It would be very surprising if this did not go through.
Now, it's also interesting to think how this is going to affect Qantas. But for so long, Qantas has been this kind of almighty beast that, overshadows everybody in the Australian aviation industry. They still have, and it depends how you crunch the numbers, kind of roughly 65-70% of the market. Now they've got to have a situation where Virgin have this extraordinary backer that not only has a lot of money, essentially kind of infinite amounts of cash, right, in Qatar, but they also have aircraft, lots of big wide-body aircraft. They have the routes, they have the staff, they have the know-how. This now, it feels to me, is a huge threat to Qantas long term. Now, in the short term, it's 28 flights a week to Doha. But we saw a month or so back, Virgin were able to launch a European summer sale because they can go to Doha, and from Doha, they can go on to Europe. Suddenly, a lot of options open to Virgin that weren't open before. So I think this is, like, long-term, a good thing for competition.
And I think Virgin will as well be using as a selling point the planes themselves, because these planes have, been refitted. They've got, the Qatar Airways has, for passenger comfort and customer experience, rated as like one of, if not the best airline out there. You know, it's got these Q Suite business class seats, which are supposedly the best business class seats that you can get. And so these are the planes that will be flying the 777-300ERs. These are the planes that will be flying for Virgin to Doha. And so if you book a Virgin flight to Doha on these Qatar planes, you'll be getting these fantastic, you know, business class seats. And so Virgin will, I believe, has probably already been using that as a selling point. So it's kind of taking the fight to Qantas and Emirates, which is, you know, the big code share partner of Qantas through the Gulf.
In a little bit of trivia, when I was working on the Australian Aviation magazine, we do a kind of the back page or the last page of editorial content. It's called Inside the Archive, and we effectively talk a little bit about one particular aircraft. We talk about its history, and when we usually show a photo and we tell you how you can go see it. The aircraft that I picked for the last issue was the 777, and I made the point that the 777 is actually the best-selling wide-body aircraft of all time. But it's essentially been a kind of not an unloved aircraft because it wasn't the generational leap forward that maybe the 747 was, or even the Dreamliner or a Super Constellation. It was just it was very good at what it did. And when Virgin got rid of its, I think it was four or five 777s. Obviously, it happened in COVID. They kind of left in the dead of night. There was no fanfare. There was no final flight, anything like that. One of those aircraft, one of those 777s, ended up being given to Qatar, or maybe the lease went back. So there's a good chance that one of Virgin's 777s that it's lost during COVID could, in fact, make its way back to Virgin. So Virgin,
in a roundabout fashion.
In a roundabout fashion.
Like with the 737s
exactly.
that went to Rex.
So everyone was kicking Virgin when they were down during COVID. And look who's going to be laughing now. They are back in business. So there you go, a bit of trivia for you. Now, we are going to go for a break, but before we go for a break, I've got to do a bit of introduction. So if you remember, a couple of weeks or so ago, myself and Jordan the Great went to the Hunter Valley Air Show, which is effectively overseen by Paul Bennett Air Shows, which is a kind of like a travelling circus. They go around the country, and it's kind of led by Paul himself, who is basically Australia's best, longest-serving stunt pilot. He has recently, incredibly, got his son Jet into the game. Jet is now also a stunt pilot.
Good name.
Yeah, great name. Flying alongside Paul. It's an amazing story because obviously he grew up with this. Like when he was at school, you know, what does your dad do for a living? Oh, my dad's a stunt pilot. You know, he was in those planes, you know, almost before he could talk. I think he probably was. It's always been a dream of his to become a stunt pilot. So we had a chat to Paul, an interview that will be going online on our YouTube channel soon. We also did an interview with Jet, who's only 19, talking about how he got into the business, how everything has happened. So we're going to go for a break now. And when we come back, you will hear me interview Jet at the Hunter Valley Air Show about his experiences. Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne, and today Australian Aviation is at the Hunter Valley Air Show. Well, actually the air show hasn't started. We're recording this on the Friday and it's kind of organised chaos, but it's very exciting. We've got pilots arriving, stunts being performed, and right now, to talk about this event, I am being joined by Jeb Bennett. Jeb, welcome to this show thing, whatever it is. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks.
Now, if the name sounds familiar, the Hunter Valley Air Show, along with half the air shows in Australia, are kind of organised by Paul Bennett. It's like a travelling circus of aviation. You are his son. This is like the family calling. How did all of this come about? How did you get into the family game?
Well, I suppose I was born into the game.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been around aviation my whole life.
Yeah.
Been jumping in and out of airplanes since I was, since I could walk. And
yeah.
Dad took me for a ride on my first birthday in a aerobatic Eagle 150, and we went and did a loop and a roll, and then from I suppose that day onwards I was hanging out at the airport every day and being around airplanes and itching to get my license. I started lessons as soon as I could reach the pedals in a plane, and then from then on started progressing to went solo and then into the pits and competition aerobatics and winning a lot of them, which is great. Been having a lot of fun with that, and part of the Sky Aces on the Paul Bennett Air Shows team is really a dream come true.
How cool is it when you're at school and they're like, what does your dad do? You're like, oh, my dad's like a stunt pilot. Like that trumps everybody, right? That must be pretty cool.
No one actually believed me when I said that. No one believed me, and I had to actually, I had to tee up a excursion out to the airport so everyone could actually believe me. Everyone went out and seen all the airplanes and my dad, and everyone believed me from then on. So that worked. But
So talk me through, like, you're kind of glossing over it. How do you get into this? How long does it take before you do your first stunt, before you do something exciting? Because just being able to get your pilot's license and get in that aircraft is a huge accomplishment. How do you go to that next step? Was your mother terrified as well? Like, how does this all work?
Mum was very terrified.
Yeah.
I went solo on my 15th birthday in a RA Oz aeroplane, and then after that, for that year until I was 16, I started flying tail draggers. So with Dad in the front, I started my tail wheel endorsement, my aerobatics, constant speed, retractable, spinning, and then I was doing a lot of flying in the pits until I was 16, and then I went solo in the pits on my 16th birthday, and then did aerobatics, and I started training for sportsman for the first sportsman comp. I think it was New South Wales, and went there and did pretty good, and just kept progressing, and more aerobatics and more seat time, burn more fuel, the better you get, I suppose.
What's the coolest thing you can do in an aircraft? If you were to like really show off, what's the best thing you're able to do?
Well, it's cool to me. I like doing shoulder rolls. It's like tumbling the airplane. It's really fun, and you're strapped to an airplane, so it feels cool. You're tumbling around the plane. It's awesome fun.
Yeah.
But that's probably my favourite manoeuvre, and the thing I think is the coolest.
Yeah. What's the adrenaline like when you're doing these things? And do you still get nervous now, or is it kind of like you've done it so much it's like second nature to you?
I still get nervous. If I'm flying in front of a lot of people, I get nervous. It's hard to sort of, block that vision for me at the moment. I'm still new to it, so just try and go and have 15 minutes before I get in the plane and calm down a bit.
Yeah.
Get into it.
So are you performing over the weekend here?
Yeah, I'll be performing in the Sky Aces. I'll be flying number 2 to Dad, so I'll be on the right wing in the bright red Wolf 360.
Yeah. Can you talk us through a little bit? Well, we're actually behind here, Pit Special, which I know they've got a number of Pit Specials, am I right?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Talk me through this. I would be hopeless flying it. Is this a nice thing to fly if you're in the business doing exciting stuff?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I've never actually flown in this one.
Yeah.
Only Dad flies it.
Yeah.
It's very special to him. And there's only one in the world of this model. It's called the Wolf Pits Pro.
Yeah.
So it's like the highest performing biplane in the world.
Yeah.
And it's an animal.
Do you think he loves the plane more than he loves you? Because it sounds to me like there's like an emotional connection. He's not losing that one.
I mean, I hope he loves me more than the plane, but that is his baby. He loves it. Yeah.
So what do you fly then? Talk me through a little bit about your
I fly a miniature. It's a scaled down Wolf Pits. It's called a Wolf 360. So it's a 4-cylinder Wolf Pits. This is a 6-cylinder.
Yeah.
So it flies great. Like, it rolls unbelievably. It's just the stick centering's beautiful, and it does some cool stunts. It's got a big tail and elevator on it, and if anything, from what I've heard, I think it flies better than the Wolf Pits, to be honest. Don't tell Dad.
No. So, like, what's the future for you? Is this like your full-time career? Is this like what you do all the time? Is this like a bit of fun on the side? How does it work? Because it's like one of those jobs that's so mental. Yeah. You think that will never actually happen. How does it work?
Well, I work for my dad, so I'm around the airplanes every day of the week. I go flying. I try and fly at least 3 times a week. So on my lunch break, get to go for a fly and practice all of the competition aerobatics. And when we're practicing for an air show, we try and practice every day and get the G tolerance up. And so we're flying a lot of the time. And then when we're not flying them, we're maintaining them. So,
How much effort is it? Because basically, for those that aren't aware, Paul Bent Air Shows, it's like a travelling circus almost, going around the country, setting up. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's very stressful. What is it like having to go around the country, set these things up? Because it is like, logistically, this seems insane. Like, I mean, this must be a really full-on life. You must need to be like so dedicated to make all this work.
Yeah, you have to get used to living out of a bag, I'll tell you that. But you have to be committed to it, and like we do, we'll do 11 shows in a week, every weekend. Yeah. And it's just something you got to get used to, traveling around. And I'm a ferry pilot now, so I get to ferry a lot of the planes there, which makes it a lot funner. Yeah. But we're a circus, and just everything comes wherever we go. The truck. We do a lot of fencing at shows that we run around the country, and so normally, like, we'll start on a Tuesday, and the lead up to the weekend, we'll get it all done, and plus practice and ferry all the planes there, you know. It's not an easy job, but it's definitely, it pays off at the end of it.
Yeah. How many of there are you in the kind of Paul Bennett Airshow's team? Because you must be like, it must be quite a close-knit thing, like one big family kind of thing.
Yeah, it's one big family, but it's never big enough. You know, we always need more people, more pilots, and definitely more people helping on the ground. It's tough not having enough people. Yeah. But it's my family. Like it's a family business. We're all family pretty much. Yeah. And if there's going to be people watching this, wherever this ends up, who might want to become a stunt pilot like yourself, how do you get into it? You had a bit of an advantage. You've got the family business, but is this something you can actually do? Is this like, what's the pathway into this? Yeah, well, I definitely did have a great entry into it, but if you want to start your aerobatics, or you want to fly pits one day, just go to Aero Hunter flight training and we'll sort you out there. Well, I think on that note, that was absolutely brilliant. Jeb, thank you very much for joining us, and good luck over the weekend. Thank you. Thank you very much, mate. Cheers. Thank you very much. That was great. Yeah, cheers. That was great. Okay, welcome back there. So you just heard a little bit there from Jet Bennett, of course, the son of Paul Bennett from Hunter Valley Air Show. We will step back into talking a little bit about the news. Jake, what are we talking about next?
Well, before the break, we were talking about Virgin Australia, so let's continue talking about Virgin Australia.
I should probably have waited till we finished with Virgin Australia news, but it's not a professional.
Well, it's already it's been like 50 minutes already. Like we took 45 minutes to get to that break. So, it probably was overdue going to that break.
Yeah, I really messed up.
So I was going to say something, but we were steaming ahead. There have been updates on Virgin Australia's plans to allow pets in the cabin on select domestic flights. You will recall that this is something that they announced almost a year ago now, at the start of March or sometime in March 2024. It says they've said that they've received CASA approval, but they're still sort of working through the regulatory process. But we now know a bit more about what's going to happen. So basically, if you have a small dog or a cat, provided it is at least 8 weeks old and fits within an approved soft-sided pet carrier, you can take it on the plane and have it in one of 2 designated rows on these select flights.
Like a kind of a dog row. This is brilliant.
Kind of, yeah. So they put under the seat in front. They would still need enough room and ventilation. Pets would not be allowed to leave the carrier on the plane. They would not be allowed to leave the carrier in the airport, except when you're going through security or when you're using the designated animal relief areas.
So hang on. So like you got a dog in a basket or whatever.
Yes.
Does that have to go through the same security machine as your
I think you have to take it out when you're going through security. I don't think you put your dog through the X-ray machine.
That'd be absolutely brilliant. And do you reckon like maybe every third dog they like sweep them down and like
just like pat the dog down, check it for explosives.
Yeah, no, I'd love it. I'd be like, if like some little puppy golden retriever comes along, I'm gonna be like, oh, we're gonna have to give this one a good stroke. Just make sure.
Just imagine if they were like running like the sticky wand over the golden retriever and bomb material detected. What would you do with that?
What kind of awful un-Australian thing is it to strap a bomb to
they used to,
a Labrador?
I think didn't the Russians try to do that in the Second World War? You know, they strapped dogs to bombs. They strapped bombs to dogs and taught them to run under the tanks, because the idea that the dog would run under the German tank and then explode and take out the German tank. But they didn't have any German tanks to train the dogs with. They only had Soviet tanks, and so when they let the dogs loose with the bombs on them, the dogs ran under the Soviet tanks and blew up the Soviet tanks. That's the story that I've heard. I'm just checking to see if that actually happened.
This is live journalism.
Soviet dog bombs. Yeah, anti-tank dogs. So they would be starved and trained to run under tanks to find food. Supposedly they would be trained to run under the tanks and they would explode. So their deployment revealed some serious... The first group of anti-tank dogs arrived at the front line end of the summer of 1941. 30 dogs, 40 trainers. Deployment revealed some serious problems. In order to save fuel and ammo, dogs had been trained on tanks which stood still and did not fire. In the field, the dogs refused to dive under moving tanks. Some persistent dogs ran near the tanks waiting for them to stop, but were shot in the process. Gunfire scared away many. They would run back to the trenches and often detonated the charge upon jumping in, killing Soviet soldiers. To prevent this, the returning dogs had to be shot. Jesus. Another serious training mistake was revealed later. So the Soviets used their own diesel engine tanks to train the dogs rather than German tanks, which had gasoline engines, as the dogs relied on their acute sense of smell. The dogs sought out familiar Soviet tanks instead of strange-smelling German tanks. So there is a precedent, basically, for strapping bombs to dogs. It's just not a very good idea.
As tangents go on this show, that is the weirdest one we've ever done. But
yes. Don't strap a bomb to your dog or cat is the motto here. But sorry, not the motto, the lesson here. But getting back to the pets on the planes. The pet and the carrier together cannot weigh more than 8 kilograms. If you are traveling with your pet, you will need to book it directly for travel through the guest contact center, and Virgin is planning to release this pet travel guide with tips and suggestions for customers. So that's the latest on this basic pets in the cabin on the planes policy. Now, there have been people who have been saying, and you know, there are concerns, you know, what if the pet, has an accident on the flight? What if, there's people with pet allergies on the flight and the recirculated air gets the fur and the dander everywhere?
God.
So it's, there's been some criticism of this policy.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, they're losers. I mean, who's against it? I know you don't like dogs.
People with pet allergies would be.
Oh, God, I don't care. I have people with pet allergies. I've got no time for these people. The only thing is I think the law should go further because at the moment, basically, it's a small animal that kind of goes in the basket under the seat or whatever. I'd rather just be allowed to just bring whatever dog you want. And if you have a big dog, just give him his own seat.
That would be a terrible... I don't think that CASA would allow a giant...
losers.
I don't think CASA would allow a Doberman Pinscher to just be running around the aisle of a 737.
Brilliant. I'd love that. I'd pay a premium to just have a dog running around on my flight. It'd be excellent. I'd pay a premium to sit you, when we go to Avalon...
Severe air safety issue.
Sit you next to a golden retriever. It'd just be like slobbering
if I'm
you.
sitting next to Jordan, it's nearly the same thing.
Good point. Good joke. Right, we're going to talk about something else. We've probably got more news stories, haven't we? What's up next?
We do. There has been some development in Qantas and Qantas Link. So a couple of changes in plane types on various routes. The first one is Darwin to Singapore. Now, Darwin to Singapore has not launched yet. It's slated to launch at the end of next month. But Qantas was planning to use its new fleet of A220s on this route. Long range, quiet, fuel efficient, all new, brand spanking new interior, these small planes flying Darwin to Singapore. And they were going to do that 5 times a week. But due to some training requirements, and possibly the fact that so far they only got 5 of the A220s, I think they were expecting more by now, but the route will instead launch with 737s. So Qantas will be using its 737s initially to fly Darwin to Singapore, and will move to the A220s in October. Now, the frequency will be reduced by 1 per week, so it will only be flying 4 times per week. But because the 737 is a bigger plane, it will essentially be the same number of seats.
So the capacity roughly
will be roughly the same, if not a little bit more.
Yeah.
But the frequency will be reduced, which might be a bit inconvenient if you were planning to fly on the day that Qantas is now pulling that flight. Darwin, the A220s, currently they're operating sort of East Coast routes for Qantas Link. Going to have to wait a little longer for those to go international, though they will eventually. Interestingly, this is the second time that Qantas has changed the type of plane that they were going to use on that route. Originally, the route was supposed to launch in December using Embraer E190s that Qantas is leasing, wet leasing from Alliance. By the way, Qantas has now called in all of its allocation of wet leased E190s from Alliance, which is contributing to Alliance's solid financial results for the half year. But so they were going to launch that route in December. They pushed it back to March so that you could use the A220s, and now they're keeping the launch date but pushing the A220 part back. So that's the first of the fleet developments.
Okay. Go on, what's the second?
I don't know. I don't know if you wanted to say something about the 737s.
No, it's fair. It was fair enough. That's more, as a co-host, that was more a rare stumble. I'm sure it's a very nice trip from Darwin to Singapore. I mean, roughly how long does that take? Just put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I did see amusing comments from on our Facebook page. Someone said, that's only 2 hours. Someone else pointed out 4.5, and I think there was a comment that said, 2 hours in what? An F-35. So we do sometimes get good comments on our Facebook page, though they are few and far between. The other thing that Qantas is doing is you will recall that last year Qantas moved to purchase a bunch of midlife Q400s.
Yes.
So some,
That's second-hand, and it's like
gently used Q400s from an overseas carrier.
gently used.
Used. They are getting these Q400s in now. I think they have a couple of them already. The first of them arrived in December. So they began entering service from the end of last year. But these new Q400s, they are enabling Qantas to pull its smaller aircraft like the Q300 out of Adelaide entirely. So they're taking the Q300s out of Adelaide. Those Q300s, I believe, are eventually going to be sold to Skytrans. Skytrans will use them, for example, to operate the route to Lord Howe Island, which Qantas is also pulling out of because Q400s can't land on Lord Howe Island, but Q300s can.
Great trivia.
Thank you.
Excellent.
They're taking the Q300s, which have 50 seats, out of Adelaide, and they're putting the, I think, 74-seat Q400s into all of these regional routes from Adelaide, including Port Lincoln, Whyalla, Mount Gambier, and Kangaroo Island. CEO of QantasLink, Rachel Yangoyan, says, quote, these larger aircraft will bring more seats, a faster flight time, and improved reliability for South Australia, and it reaffirms our commitment to the regions. This is the first time the 74-seat Q400 aircraft will be back in Adelaide in 10 years. So these are newer, larger aircraft that will add more capacity into Adelaide on these regional services.
It's also quite an interesting insight into the kind of domino effect and the knock-on effect and how hard it is to get aircraft. Actually, they have to plan meticulously all the routes based on what aircraft they've got. That has a knock-on effects to other airlines as well. There's a lot more complicated process than a lot of people will realise.
Yeah, exactly. So it's good that Qantas is getting these new planes in. Touch on a topic from earlier. It's something that we actually should have done ages ago, isn't it?
That's nice kind of circling back to the start. I almost feel that's where we should end the show. Usually at this point, this is where you jump in and go, oh no, there's something else we need to talk about.
Well, we've only had one break, Adam.
No, we've had two breaks, haven't we? Because we had a second break effectively when we had the bit in the middle when we.
No, that was just we talked from the moment we started the show all the way through to when we had that break.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean. Like the first section was way too long, so we messed that up. Then we had the middle section, which we've like superimposed in. So we're now on the third section. Do you see what I mean? So we've had two ad breaks.
I suppose if you look at it like that.
There you go. That's I'm on the ball. So we should.
We'll have to have production put a second ad in after the.
Yeah, but they will do. Yeah. They'll put the ad in. Like Jordan the Great knows what he's doing.
We're professionals here at Australian Aviation.
We don't...
As is evidenced by the fact that we're talking about our production process like we don't know what's going on.
Well, exactly. Right, we will wrap up the show.
Yes. Be sure to check out the next issue of Australian Aviation magazine.
Oh yeah,
when
I was
it
meant
comes
to do
out.
that, wasn't I?
Yeah. See, this is why you keep me around, Adam.
Yeah, that and my talent crisis. Yeah, so that was mean. I don't mean that. Yes, so we spent last week very stressed working on getting the Australian Aviation print magazine ready. We obviously have this look into Rex. You have done a brilliant feature looking at the evacuation from Darwin, which was basically
yes. So if you were paying attention to the Australian Aviation podcast over the Christmas break, I spoke to Paul Boyce, who was the Darwin manager for TAA in 1974 at the time of Cyclone Tracy, and we've taken that interview and transformed it alchemy-like into a feature looking at the impact of Cyclone Tracy on the city of Darwin and the people of Darwin and what came afterwards and the vital role that aviation played. So if you fancy, go back and check out that podcast to prepare yourself for the feature that is to come.
The director's cut. And the good thing about doing a feature is obviously you can give more context and information about
fantastic photos as well.
I was about to say, so he actually gave us or allowed us to use some of the photos. Some of them are incredible because one of the kind of most extraordinary parts of the story, without ruining it, was that when the cyclone hit, him and his partner at the time basically hid in the bathroom.
Still his partner and his son.
His
pregnant wife and his son.
His pregnant wife was basically hiding in the bathroom, or they were taking cover in the bathroom. We've got a picture of the bathroom where they were. We've got a picture of the house there. We've got a lot of photos that show the destruction of Darwin. And it's incredible.
Thank you to the Library and Archives, NT.
Yeah. It's extraordinary because when it hit, it effectively destroyed around 80% of the buildings of Darwin. And so they had to rebuild it again. And the extraordinary thing is that obviously you had a bombing campaign in Darwin, which obviously did enormous damage. They had to rebuild the city.
That was in World War II, not during Cyclone Tracy.
To be very clear. So there was a bombing campaign that kind of wiped out a lot of Darwin or did a lot of damage to it. Then what we're talking like 20 years later, that there was obviously another destruction event, and they had to rebuild the city yet again after that. And it was interesting. They talked about how, the Prime Minister of the time came down and basically said, we've rebuilt this city once, we can rebuild it again. And when they rebuilt it again for a second time, they did so with a series of kind of planning restrictions or
new building codes and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. That meant that should a natural disaster on that scale happen again, the disaster wouldn't be so bad, or that the buildings would be able to stand up to it. But when you see the photos, the scale of the destruction, the idea that this city was flattened, it was wiped out, it was basically unlivable, and they had to get everybody out, and they had to get people out really quickly. And it's almost a forgotten story that it was like the kind of Dunkirk style evacuation that Australian aviation or the industry had to do.
And they made good use of the new 727s that had just come into Australia at the time. Those tri-jets. I mean, TAA had them. I think Ansett had them. And that, we've got a photo from the NT Library and Archives of like people queuing up to get on to one of these TAA 727s for the evacuation flight.
And it's extraordinary because when you think that Paul had to kind of spring into action, right? But he just had to hide or shelter with his pregnant wife in the bathroom. They're obviously distraught. They kind of lost their home, or their home was like destroyed. They had to go and find somewhere to stay. And while he was dealing with this kind of personal trauma, he then had to spring into action, get his kind of game face on, and sort this all happening. So it was this kind of case of the whole city coming together for the greater good. And of course, many years later, their population now far exceeds what they had. So they kind of built back stronger and better. But it is an absolutely extraordinary story.
It is. And we've got some other great features as well in the magazine.
Good for teeing me up there. Well, our cover feature looks at the F-35, and the reason we've done this is the RAF have received the last of their fleet of 72. And what's amazing about this is that a lot of outsiders to aviation would think, they come up with a diet for an aircraft, a few years later they make the thing and then it gets delivered. Actually, this whole process goes back over 20 years, and Australia was one of the kind of founding partners in the F-35 program. That's how long it takes to make that generational leap. So we're in the 5th generation. Not only did they have to, obviously put down the money and help its development, they had to actually rethink how the RAF worked. They had to rethink how they train pilots. They have to rethink the logistics and the support, because it's a real step change for the whole kind of defence industry. So what we've done is track down the most notable photos from a time. So you'll see the kind of original F-35s in development in the factory in Fort Worth. You see the original pilots that the RAF tasked with. You see the first aircraft that arrived. We see the last aircraft that arrived. So we kind of tell the story. And it's extraordinary to think the amount of years and the amount of effort that went into making this thing happen. The last aircraft, the last of the 72, kind of quietly touched down in December. I believe that they're looking really at the F-35 to be in action for sort of another 20, maybe 30 years. And even though we've just got the last one, they've actually started upgrading it. So the last set of F-35s we had a major upgrade, and it's been developed in such a way that every few years it will be upgraded again and again and again, because even though the aircraft itself may stay broadly the same, the technology on board will keep advancing and keep advancing. So we have a look at that. We've got Inside the Archive looking at the 777s.
We've got a look forward at what's going to be at Avalon Air Show this year.
We do, good.
Not including us. We will be at Avalon Air Show,
there.
but we don't mention ourselves in the article, I believe. But all of a list of the aircraft that have so far been announced, the companies that are bringing their aircraft to the show. It's 100 years, I think, of the Moth family of aircraft. So there'll be displays of moths there. The planes, not the insects.
Obviously.
Well, I mean, they might also be. There might also be insect displays there. We don't know. But look forward to what's going to be at Avalon. We've got some contentious opinion pieces this time around as well. I think you're arguing against the nationalisation of Rex in a way.
And you were very much arguing. No, you argued for it in the previous.
I had.
I'm trying to think exactly what I wrote. What did I write? I think I talked about how Rex found itself in this mess, how it found itself in this position. So we speak about that. We have a little feature on the Boom Overture, which I think we spoke about a couple of episodes ago, which is the kind of the first commercial airline or commercial aircraft to fly supersonically. And then this is a demonstrator.
Since
Concorde, yes. So this is a demonstrator version of what will become the Boom Overture that they believe can sort of be the new Concorde. What makes this difference is, one, it's basically gone supersonically. Two, they've got like 130 orders. So this thing is going to happen. It's going to be a part of our future.
We've had a reader as well. Submit.
Yes, I was going to talk about. So I will. I actually need to call you if you are watching this. I need to call you this week. So as you imagine, deadlines that we're not organised at all. It's a mess. It always comes down to the last 2 days. Things. Yeah, shush, Phil, if you're listening, no, no. But it always comes down. Things go wrong. Things happen. And a reader kind of out of nowhere got in touch with me, and he said, when I was growing up as a kid, and he's from WA, but his dad would work in the UK, and one time he brought him back this kind of poster of a Spitfire, and his dream was to always sort of pilot a Spitfire, and he managed to do this the first time about a year ago, and he had his son in a chaser plane. And I've got to say, it's probably the best written, other than your piece, Jay. It's the best written thing in the magazine. It's absolutely extraordinary. When you are stressed and in need of anything, and this gift from God, this beautifully written gift from God comes in, it was absolutely brilliant. So I absolutely suggest you you have a read of that. I want to trap him up, get him as like a regular contributor, because it was absolutely exceptional. That's probably about it for the magazine. We'll talk more about the magazine when it comes out. God willing, it's at the printers now, and they've not done it upside down and stuff.
Yeah, hopefully our issues weren't on that plane that flipped upside down in Toronto.
Yeah, no, hopefully. I mean, yeah, hopefully it wasn't. Right, we're gonna end the show now and end the nonsense. Jake, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam.
And we will be back on this show the same time next week. But for now, from me and Jake, goodbye.
Goodbye.